Have you ever wondered what would happen if your mother's beloved home was threatened by an overreaching HOA and they had no idea you were the mayor with the power to stop them? I'm Emily Carter, and this story will keep you glued to your screen. Imagine the quiet neighborhood I've called home for most of my life, a place with modest houses shaded by ancient oaks and a warm sense of community. I'm the mayor of this small town, but every Sunday morning, I set aside my badge to carry groceries to my mother's house, just 2 blocks away. Now 82 since Dad passed 3 years ago, I've made it a ritual to bring her weekly supplies, fresh bread, her favorite chamomile tea, and sometimes a bouquet to brighten her day. Mom's house isn't fancy, but it's everything to us. A cozy 2-story brick home where I grew up, with laughter echoing from decades past. The wind chime Dad made still hangs on the porch, its gentle tinkling a reminder of his love for woodworking, while Mom's prize-winning carnations bloom in the front yard, filling the air with their sweet scent each morning. But things started to change. 6 months ago, Linda Harper, the new HOA president, began lurking around the streets with a measuring tape and camera, as if plotting something. I'd heard neighbors whisper about ridiculous fines, but I never thought it would threaten Mom's sanctuary. That day, as I parked in front of her house with the grocery bags, I saw Linda measuring Mom's carnations, her camera flashing. My stomach tightened. Something was coming. And I'm going to tell you the whole story, from the first absurd violations to the moment justice was served. Don't look away, because you won't believe what Linda did, and how I, as mayor, turned disaster into victory. Can you imagine the chill that ran down my spine when I realized Linda Harper wasn't just harassing my mother for petty reasons, but something much bigger was at play? One Thursday afternoon, when I stopped by Mom's to check on her after a series of violation notices, I saw Linda standing at the edge of Mom's property, measuring tape in hand, sizing up every inch of the land, just 4 feet from Mom's carnations. She wasn't just measuring. She was snapping photos rapid fire, as if building a case for some scheme. I watched from the kitchen window and caught Linda muttering into her phone, her voice a determined whisper. "This will be the perfect spot." The uneasy feeling grew when, a few days later, I drove past Linda's house and saw a sleek black SUV parked out front, the words "Silver Parking Systems" emblazoned in gold on the door. Through the tinted windows, I made out Linda talking with a tall man, who I later learned was Robert Harper, her husband. I'd seen Robert at an HOA meeting once, but I had no idea his company was involved. My gut twisted. Silver Parking Systems wasn't a name I recognized from any local public projects, and that made me suspicious. Just then my phone buzzed. It was Anna Lee, my best friend since high school, now a city council member. "Emily, you need to see this now," she texted, attaching a PDF. I opened the email in my car, my heart racing as I read the HOA's neighborhood redevelopment plan, a community enhancement project featuring a new parking lot, worth millions, and the exact location was my mother's land, including her beloved 2-story home. The detailed map showed plans to demolish Mom's house for a 50,000 square foot parking lot, complete with retail spaces. I gripped the steering wheel, realizing Linda wasn't just trying to find my mother. She was aiming to seize the property for personal gain. As I left Mom's that day, I looked back at the familiar garden, where the carnations still bloomed, but the sense of dread wouldn't leave me. What was Linda measuring? How was Silver Parking Systems involved? I knew I had to act, and as mayor, I wasn't going to let Linda destroy our family's legacy. Can you picture my outrage when Linda Harper took things to a whole new level, leaving no doubt about her scheme? One Saturday morning, as I dropped by Mom's with a basket of fruit, I found 2 HOA inspectors in the yard, armed with professional cameras, snapping pictures of every corner of Mom's house, from the old wooden fence to the window frames. They'd marked Mom's carnations with orange tape, labeling them "must be removed immediately" for exceeding the height limit by 3.2 inches and detracting from the neighborhood's aesthetic. My mother, hands trembling, just stood there, tears welling, clutching Dad's wind chime as if it were the only thing she had left. "They said if I don't clear them, I'll get another $500 fine, she whispered, her voice choked. Linda showed up moments later, iPad in hand, her voice shrill. We're just enforcing standards, Mayor Carter. Your mother's house is dragging down the neighborhood's value. I tried to stay calm, but my blood boiled as she pointed at Mom's beloved garden like it was trash. The pressure mounted. Every day, Mom received new violation notices. From the wrong shade of door paint, 200, to noise from birds at the feeder, 150, totaling over $1,200 in just 10 days. Linda even threatened that if Mom didn't comply, the HOA would foreclose on the house, a prospect that nearly broke my mother. I decided to attend the HOA meeting that Tuesday night at the community center, not as the mayor, but as a concerned daughter. The room was packed, but when I walked in, everyone fell silent, eyes curious. Linda sat at the head of the table, her red-painted nails tapping rhythmically on her laptop. Mayor Carter, she said, emphasizing my title like a mockery. What a surprise to see you here. The meeting started normally, discussing pool hours and fence paint colors, but when Linda brought up the neighborhood redevelopment project, I raised my hand. Miss Harper, have you consulted the affected homeowners like my mother about this parking lot plan? Linda gave a fake smile, adjusting her designer glasses, and replied, The HOA board has the authority to decide for the greater good. Your mother's house, with its outdated style, is lowering the neighborhood's value. I left the meeting with one resolve. Linda didn't just want my mother to comply. She was aiming to seize our family's property, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Can you feel my shock when I discovered Linda Harper wasn't just trying to destroy my mother's house, but was executing a much larger scheme? After that frustrating HOA meeting, I knew I had to act. That night, sitting in Mom's familiar kitchen, I called Mike Reynolds, a private investigator and college friend who'd helped me with sensitive cases as mayor. Mike, I need you to look into Linda Harper and Silver Parking Systems, I said, my voice firm. There's something off about her parking lot plan. Just 3 days later, Mike called back, his tone tense. Emily, you won't believe this. Silver Parking Systems, Robert Harper's company, is operating illegally. They never registered for a private security license in Illinois, yet they've signed a $2 million contract with the HOA to build a 50,000 square foot parking lot on your mother's land. My blood boiled as Mike emailed me the documents. Shady contracts, altered HOA meeting minutes, and Silver Parking Systems' expired business license from last year. But what truly shocked me was the old property map Mike found in the city archives. The original property lines from 1975 showed Mom's house was outside the HOA's jurisdiction by exactly 4 feet. They have no legal right to touch your mother's house, Mike said, his voice steady. Linda is violating Illinois property laws, and her plan is clearly to profit from demolishing the house to build a commercial parking lot, splitting the gains with Robert. I sat in silence, watching Mom sleep in her armchair, clutching Dad's wind chime. Linda wasn't just harassing. She was playing a dangerous game, using the HOA to seize our family's property. With this evidence, I knew I could expose her, but I needed more time to make sure everything was airtight. The next morning, I called the city's legal team, ready to fight, not just for Mom, but for the entire community Linda was threatening. As my flight from Chicago touched down, I received a text from Anna Lee. Emily, come back now. It's worse than you think. My heart clenched. I raced straight from the airport to the neighborhood, and as I turned onto Mom's street, what I saw made me freeze. The familiar 2-story house, where I grew up, where my family's memories lived, was gone. In its place was a vacant lot, littered with rubble, dust still hanging in the air. Mom stood there, her back more hunched than ever, holding an old wooden box. Inside were the few mementos she'd managed to grab before the house was crushed. Her eyes were clouded with tears, but she didn't cry. She was too heartbroken to even sob. Linda Harper stood a few yards away, sipping champagne, smiling triumphantly next to her husband, Robert Harper, the owner of Silver Parking Systems. They'd won, or so they thought. I clenched my fists, but anger couldn't explode now. I needed precision, not impulsiveness. I hugged Mom, then turned and walked away. Not because I was giving up, but because I had something more important to do. Expose them. That night, back in my office, I started digging into every HOA document Linda had used to justify the demolition. Examining the violation notices, I spotted a crucial detail. The documents were all backdated to before Linda took office. Blatant forgery. Anna Lee helped me access the old property maps from 1975, and the truth finally emerged. The HOA's boundaries never included Mom's house. Linda had used HOA authority to interfere with property she had no jurisdiction over. But that wasn't the strongest evidence yet. Following the trail of silver parking systems, I had Mike Reynolds, my trusted PI, check the company's financial transactions. Mike didn't disappoint. Within 24 hours, he found a video recording of a private meeting between Linda and Robert, filmed by a disgruntled silver parking systems employee. "Make sure everything's signed legally, right?" Linda asked, her voice a whisper in the video. Robert smirked. "We've got everything we need. You just get that old lady out. When the project's done, we'll make millions." A perfect confession. I closed my laptop, taking a deep breath. I had it all. Proof of forged HOA documents, property maps showing Linda had no claim over Mom's land, and a video of bribery between Linda and Robert Harper. They thought they could bury justice under the rubble. But I'm Emily Carter, the mayor of this city, and tomorrow, Linda Harper would learn she'd demolished the wrong person's house. I walked into the HOA meeting that evening, not as the mayor, but as an outraged citizen, a daughter determined to reclaim justice for her mother. The room was packed with residents, familiar faces, neighbors who'd once feared the HOA, now sat in silence, waiting. Linda Harper sat at the head of the table, still smug, fingers gliding over her iPad as if this meeting was a meaningless game. Robert Harper stood behind her, arms crossed, as if he had nothing to worry about. I stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table, my voice firm. "Before we discuss any redevelopment plans, I have some evidence to present." I turned on the projector and played the video of Linda and Robert's conversation. "Make sure everything's signed legally, right?" Linda whispered. Robert smirked. "We've got everything we need. You just get that old lady out. When the project's done, we'll make millions." The room went dead silent. Linda froze, her face paling. "She's lying!" Linda jumped up, trying to regain control. "That video is edited. The HOA has full authority to decide on neighborhood improvements, and everything was legal." I flipped open the 1975 property map, pointing to the clear boundary. My mother's house was never under HOA jurisdiction. And here's the expired business license for silver parking systems. Your husband's company isn't even allowed to operate, let alone receive a multi-million-dollar contract from the HOA. A wave of outrage swept through the room. Mrs. Martinez, an elderly resident, stood up. "She fined me $500 for planting the wrong flowers. This isn't about protecting the neighborhood, it's abuse of power." Mr. Daniels, a retired veteran, slammed his fist on the table. "The HOA forced me to pay for sidewalk repairs that never happened. She's been using her position to bleed us dry." Shouts and anger filled the air. Linda looked around for support, but no one was on her side anymore. I turned to the HOA board chair, Samuel Green, and declared, "I move for an immediate vote. Remove Linda Harper from the HOA, ban her from any future board positions, and demand a full investigation into her financial dealings." "I second!" a voice rang out. "Second." Hands shot up across the room, a historic vote. "And as for her breaking the law," I said, turning to the door where 2 police officers stood ready, "let the authorities handle that." Linda barely managed to scream, "No, this is a setup. I'm being framed." But it was too late. The handcuffs clicked, and Linda Harper, the woman who'd manipulated the entire neighborhood, was led away in front of the very people she'd oppressed. The next morning, I was at City Hall. As mayor, I signed an emergency order freezing all HOA financial accounts for a full audit. Any money the HOA had illegally collected from residents would be refunded, starting with my mother and those Linda had abused the most. We established the Community Support Fund, aimed at compensating families the HOA had wronged and using the remaining funds to improve the neighborhood, not through shady projects but by helping the people who lived here. The HOA was no longer a tool for a few to profit. It became an organization that truly served the community. But for me, the real victory was rebuilding Mom's house. I hired architects to design a new home, keeping the traditional red brick style Mom loved, but with necessary upgrades. A ground floor bedroom so she wouldn't have to climb stairs, a modern security system with cameras and motion lights to ensure no one could harass her again, and a memorial garden right in front of the porch, where neighbors helped replant the carnations, the very flowers Linda had marked for destruction. On the day of the unveiling, I brought Mom to the new house. She stepped through the sturdy wooden door, touched the restored wind chime from the old house, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "It's home again, Emily," she said. The neighborhood changed, too. No more absurd fine letters, no more fear when someone in an HOA jacket showed up. Instead, neighbors volunteered to help each other, organized gatherings, cleaned up public spaces, turning the place into a real community. As for Linda Harper, after the scandal, she had no choice but to leave the neighborhood quietly. No more power, no more support, no more ability to threaten anyone. I stood on Mom's porch, looking at the warm lights inside, hearing the laughter of neighbors. We didn't just beat Linda. We reclaimed our community. My victory over Linda Harper's HOA wasn't just a personal story. It became a national example of HOA abuse. At City Hall, I proposed a new law, the Homeowner and Property Protection Act. It clearly stated that HOAs cannot force residents to sell or demolish property without city approval. All HOA fines must be legally reviewed and cannot exceed reasonable limits, and residents have the right to appeal to court before any enforcement action. Within months, the law passed not only in my city, but was considered in other states. The story of HOA abuse, Linda Harper, and my fight spread, catching the attention of the media and lawmakers. I was invited to the National Homeowners' Rights Conference, where I shared my entire struggle. I presented evidence of HOA overreach and how it could be stopped with stricter regulations. Standing on stage, I looked across the auditorium. Homeowners from all over the U.S. were listening, many of whom had faced similar bullying from their HOAs. I ended my speech with one line: "Justice isn't something we beg for. It's something we stand up and take back together." The room erupted in applause. But the most important thing to me was still Mom and our neighborhood. In the end, we didn't just rebuild a house. We rebuilt a community, where no one has to live in fear of absurd rules, where neighbors help each other instead of being threatened by a greedy HOA. Mom continued tending her carnation garden, but now she didn't just plant flowers for herself. With the neighbors, she helped create a community garden where everyone could grow vegetables, flowers, and sit together like in the old days. And Linda Harper? After being removed and stripped of power, she left the neighborhood without a word. As for me, I kept fighting, not just as mayor, but as a defender of justice, a daughter, and a member of this community. HOA abuse can be defeated. We just need to stand up, together. My story isn't just about my mother or the house the HOA targeted. It reflects a bigger issue: HOA abuse and how they exploit residents' lack of legal knowledge for profit. Many people think HOAs are the supreme authority in a neighborhood, able to do whatever they want. But the truth is, HOAs aren't above the law, and there are clear boundaries they can't cross. Here's what HOAs cannot do, according to U.S. law. Homeowners associations cannot seize your property arbitrarily. They can issue fines for violating signed covenants, but they have no right to order foreclosure without going through the legal system. If an HOA threatens to seize your property, you have the right to appeal and take it to civil court. Homeowners associations cannot violate personal property rights. If your property is outside the HOA's boundaries, like my mother's house, the HOA has no authority to impose rules on you. Always check your property lines in the local land records office. HOAs cannot fine you arbitrarily or change rules without resident consent. If an HOA issues a violation notice, they must prove the rule existed beforehand and was agreed upon by all residents. If they change rules without a vote, it's a violation of proper HOA governance. Homeowners associations cannot use illegal enforcement methods. They can't hire fake security, block roads, or prevent you from using your legal property. If an HOA uses tactics like installing barriers, tire spikes, or unauthorized cameras, you can sue them for violating privacy and property rights. Homeowners associations cannot sign contracts with outside companies without financial transparency. If an HOA signs a contract, like with silver parking systems in my story, without a public meeting and without disclosing finances, that's financial fraud. You have the right to request an audit of the HOA's financial records and report any suspicious activity. If you're a resident in an HOA-controlled area, don't let yourself be bullied by unreasonable rules. You have the right to demand transparency and fight back when abused. Always keep all violation notices and correspondence from the HOA. Check your property lines in the land records. If threatened by the HOA, consult a lawyer and don't sign anything you don't understand. Rally the community. Collective strength is the only way to stop HOA abuse. I beat the HOA not just because I was the mayor, but because I knew the law and had the community's support. Justice doesn't come naturally. We have to stand up and take it back. Have you ever been bullied by an HOA? Share your story and help others protect their rights. This translation preserves the narrative flow, emotional depth, cultural context, and educational intent of the original Vietnamese story, adapted naturally for an American English audience.